What's up, everybody? Welcome to Hammerdown Motorsports. Behind me we have the 2017 Camaro SS, and today we're going to be doing some much needed upgrades to our brake system. When I bought this car, it had the 4-piston Brembos in the front, which are fine if you're just daily driving and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to get into any kind of track days or anything like that, it really does need a little bit more up front. And the 1LE package comes with a 6-piston brake caliper, and that's what we're going to be installing today with our new 2-piece rotors, which are bigger than the stock ones. We're going to kind of compare the two so you can see the difference between the original stuff and what we're putting on. And we're going to be getting rid of that old DOT3 brake fluid and get some nice new racing DOT4 installed. Also, if you guys notice, I do have a new hat on today. This is actually from Wolf Racing. They're a team in Canada that has a pro mod. They also have a company called Drase Supply where they sell sporting goods and automotive supplies to the US and to Canada. I will have a link in the description. They also sent me this really nice t-shirt as well. It says Wolf Racing on the front, and they've got their logo, same as the hat, on the back. Just like that. So definitely when we get some warmer weather, I'll be able to check this thing out as well. Big thanks to them for sending that over. So let's get into the brakes. All right, so we got our driver's side wheel off. This is our original 4-piston brake. We've got an 18mm socket. There's 2 bolts on the inside that hold the caliper on. So we're gonna remove those now. And these ones are a little bit tight. I believe they're 111 foot-pounds, and then plus 15 to 30 degrees is a spec I found online. So yeah, we're gonna use our 1/2-inch ratchet, get those broken free, and get this old caliper removed. One thing for me, I don't like being really up close to brakes and breathing in any kind of dust or anything like that. It's a good idea to wash these down with water if you can, but I mean, these ones aren't super dirty. I did take it to the car wash before I did this whole procedure and really rinsed out the brake area just so I don't have any of that kind of stuff getting kicked up while I'm trying to work on my brakes. So I hope your car isn't as bad as mine. This top bolt has been kind of a bear. There's Loctite in there, and I've been kind of running it back and forth, getting it out, but it's been pretty tight the whole way out. And well, it's just one of those things you gotta do, to battle with it and get it out in one piece. Listen to that. I'm afraid to use a bigger ratchet because I don't want to break it off. Then we're really stuck, but yeah. It's definitely tighter than I thought it should have been, and definitely tighter than any brake bolts I've ever had to remove in the past. Now, to keep our fluid from leaking all over the place, I'm going to use these special vice grips. You just kind of back them off so you're just enough that you're pinching down the line that the fluid can't pass through, but you're not destroying the line in the process. These are special vice grips that are made for this. They have a really nice smooth edge on there. It's not going to damage the line. So just clamp that on there and you're pretty much good to go. Now we're going to take our 11mm socket, get that on our brake line banjo bolt. Break that guy free. We got our drip pan underneath. Got our line disconnected. Take the rest of our mounting hardware. We got the bottom one in, just a couple of threads. And there's our factory caliper. Now we're just going to set this in the pan here, allow some of that fluid to drain out. So now I've got my T30 Torx. Get that on our retaining bolt. And it wasn't very tight whatsoever. Spin that guy out of there. And our rotor is ready to be removed. So now we have our new rotor installed. Just kind of push it up against the hub. And we still have the backing plate, the factory one, behind here, and we have no issues with clearance whatsoever. So what we're gonna need to do is just find out how much we need to trim off for the caliper itself to fit, and I think we're gonna be able to reuse our factory backing plate. All right, so we got a rotor off, and I just kind of mocked up the caliper here, and you can see how really it's not a whole lot you gotta remove. We're about a 1/2 hole out on our bottom, and our top, we've got lots of room here for this backing plate. So unless there's like a heat issue, there's a reason why we need to remove this, because I know on the 1LE, it only has just a little guard here on the bottom. This top is all open. So for me, I mean, it's got these little cooling ducts and all that kind of stuff. I'm probably just gonna leave that for now. If I have heat issues with my brakes, I'll address that later. But I'd like to keep it kind of as factory as possible. And I think all I'm gonna do is just trim off a little bit here on the bottom, just so that caliper can get in onto that bolt hole. And I think we're good to go. And if you're looking for a size comparison, this is our old rotor. This is our new one. You can see how much is sticking out all the way around. And I think thickness wise, we do definitely have a thicker rotor with our two-piece than we do with our factory, just kind of one-piece steel rotor. And weight wise, I would say they're pretty similar. This one might be a tiny little bit more just because it is a thicker bit of metal. But as far as the calipers go, I actually think the 6 pistons, either way about the same, or possibly a little less. Maybe it's just wishful thinking in my head, but you're not adding a bunch of weight if that's what you're wondering. So now you can see a little closer. I drew a line right here. This is where I'm just gonna end up taking my grinder, just kind of making a nice line, cutting that off, put a little paint on there so it doesn't rust, and we should have plenty of clearance. So now we got our backing plate cut out, and I kind of wanted to leave the same amount of space at the top as was at the bottom. So you could leave a little bit more in here if you wanted to, but just kind of the way that I did it. But there you can see we got enough clearance now. We can get both bolts in, and there's enough room. We're not going to have any contact or rattling or anything like that. And we'll run it with the backing plate and see how it goes. And now that we have this all apart, might be a good time to take a wire wheel or something, clean up some of the rust that may be in there. And if you guys want to apply any kind of rust inhibitor or anything like that, now would probably be a good time for that. All right, so now we're gonna grab a T15. We're gonna remove some of these screws so we can access where our flex hose actually goes to the hard line for the brake system. We're gonna need to remove, I believe, it's a 10mm retaining bolt, and then there's just the retaining clips that hold our ABS wire to our old flex hose, and then we can get our old flex hose out and get ready for our new one to be installed. So now you can see we got our ABS line released from the flex hose. Very simple process. There's this kind of little tab in here, and it just kind of clicks back together. You can see there's just a little slot. You take a little screwdriver, get it in there, just twist it, and they pop apart, or there's probably a way to just kind of push them apart. But either way, a little screwdriver works pretty good. Then all that's left is this little horseshoe clip. We're gonna remove that once we get our line broken free, and then we can unscrew our connection right here, get our line out of the way, and get our new one installed. All right, so we jumped ahead a little bit. I put the bolts in for the caliper. They're just basically tightened up with a ratchet. We're gonna torque those to the 111 foot-pounds plus 15 to 30 degrees once we're all done here. But what I ended up doing is I got our new line in place. I got our hard line hooked up. Everything is nice and tight, cleaned everything off. Make sure there's no brake fluid or anything on your paint. The inner panel, it's a lot easier if you just take it right off, because otherwise it kind of gets in the way when you're trying to put things on and you don't want to get brake fluid on it and whatever. So just remove that completely. Our old line is out. Our old complete front brake system is out. Our new stuff is in. All we have left to do, like I said, is to torque these bolts and bleed the system. So we're going to go over to the other side, completely do the exact same thing as what we did here. It's basically just repetition at this point. So we'll get the other side all together, get these torqued up, and then we're ready to start flushing out our system. And if you're wondering what the blue stuff in here is, it's just some disc brake quiet that I sprayed on there just to keep it from rusting when we get a little bit of water in from washing and whatnot, and keep it from kind of getting that buildup in there. All right, so we got our passenger side. Everything is all connected. I use a 13mm line wrench on our connection here for our hard line to the flex hose. Everything on the other side is together as well. Now what we're gonna have to do is remove our rear wheels, and we can start doing our bleed process. Now there's been a little bit of kind of conflict, I guess, from different people saying different things about how to bleed these cars. And some people go from the farthest away from the ABS pump and then work your way towards it. So you would go left rear, left front, right front. And from what I've seen in some of the forums, and I think this applies to the 5th gen as well, is they say that the system is split not front to back, but it's actually crossed. So you would have your right rear and your left front on the same circuit, and then you'd have your left rear and your right front on the same circuit. So the bleed process in that case would be, you would start with your right rear, do your left front, then do the left rear, and then do the right front. So that's what they say the GM manual says. People have said they've done them either way and never had an issue, so we're gonna do them the GM manual way and just see how that goes. So now we're ready to bleed our brakes, and since we're switching over to dot 4 from dot 3, it's gonna take off our master cylinder cap. And then I've got this Motiv Products Evacuator. Basically all it does is pull a vacuum, and then it's able to suck fluid out of your master cylinder or whatever you're trying to work on. Just gonna be careful here not to get anything on my fender. Just gonna stick that in there, pump it up. You can see the brake fluid coming up out of there. This is just going to allow us to get most of it out of the master cylinder, so we're not pumping that much fluid through our system and basically making our swap a little bit quicker. And for our brake fluid, we're going to be using the Motul 600 RBF .4 racing brake fluid. I got 4 of the 500 milliliter bottles, and that probably is more than we need, but I really want to flush it out just to make sure we have all the dot 3 out of the system, and that way if we have a little bit extra at the end, not a big deal. I'm probably going to put 3 of these into our power bleeder, which allows us to do this by myself. I will have links in the description for the power bleeder and this brake fluid as well. So as for the power bleeder, this is the adapter that comes in the kit, and there's 2 gaskets. There's a thick one and a thin one. I have the thin one in here right now, and it seems to fit pretty good when I test fit it. And this is the one for the late model GM, so it'll screw right onto the top of the master cylinder. So we're gonna get that in place, just like so. Now we have our power bleeder bottle and pump, and then we're just gonna take this end of the hose and connect the fitting to our cap. And I think that is why there is that fitting. So we can connect this first. We're living and learning right here in front of you guys. That way we don't twist our hose all up. Let's get that nice and hand tight. Put our lid back on. And then I'm going to get a couple wrenches. We'll tighten this up real good. And then I'm going to put in our brake fluid to the bottle, and we're going to get this pumped up to about 15 PSI. We can start bleeding. So now we've got our fitting here nice and tight. Pull the pump off of here. Set that aside, nice clean spot. And I don't think you have to, but I did pour a little bit of brake fluid back into the reservoir just because, I don't know, it's maybe if there's an air bubble or something like that. I just didn't want to have air introduced into the system. I don't know if you need to or not, but that's just me. So now we're going to pour in our brake fluid. I'm probably going to start with 3 of these 500 milliliter bottles. Then we have 1 extra if we need to use that at the end, and if not, we'll have 1 next time we change our fluid. You also want to minimize the amount of time that this fluid is in the open air. You don't want to leave these containers sitting open for any length of time. Brake fluid is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture, and once it gets to a certain point, it's no good anymore. So definitely keep that in mind. That's another reason why you want to change it, especially on a high performance car, probably every 2 years, depending on how much you use it, how much you track it, and keep that fresh fluid in there, keep your brakes working really good, and then you don't have any issues with fade or any of that kind of stuff, which nobody wants to have on their high performance car, especially the speeds that these things go. Everything's nice and tight. We're going to pump this up. It's going to turn this handle. Then it comes up. Kind of got to push down a little bit just to get that to unlock. Keep an eye on our gauge. There, we're sitting at 15 PSI. We'll probably let that sit for probably about a minute or 2. Just keep an eye on that gauge. Make sure you don't have any leaks, anything like that. There is a little bit of air in these lines, but from what I've been told, that's normal. That's just going to go into the reservoir. Keep refilling our reservoir as everything gets pushed through the system, and we should be good to go. All right, a few minutes have passed, and we're still at 15 PSI. I just kind of moved it up here just so it's sitting more level, and that way once our fluid gets a little lower, we're not going to end up maybe having an air gap or something like that. So it's going to keep everything as level as possible, and we can use as much of this fluid as possible. I'm sure the pickup is very low on this thing, but better be safe than sorry. All right, so now we got the car lifted up a little bit, and I have my clear hose on top of the inside bleeder is what we're going to start with. I always go on the inside bleeder first and then the outer one. I have my 11mm wrench on the bleeder itself, and then I have a little kind of container here where I can see the fluid going inside. And my clear hose is nice because I can see the difference between the DOT 3 and the DOT 4. So once we have the nice DOT 4 clean fluid coming through here, we know that we got all the DOT 3 out of our system. And this car has 11,000 miles on it, and some of them are on the drag strip, I gotta admit. So the fluid is a little tiny bit dark. It's not terrible, but probably was time to change it anyways. So we're going to let this bleed through a little bit until we have some nice clean fluid coming through our hose. And then we can go on to our outer bleeder and move on to the left front. And now you can see we have nice clean fluid going into our bottle. So we're going to close our bleeder and then we can move to our outer one. But you can definitely tell the difference in the fluid. And it didn't really take that long at all. But we are going to do 2 passes on this just to make sure we got everything out. But for a start, this has been working really, really well. Now we're on our outer bleeder. You can see that fluid is already changing color for us. Definitely a big difference between the old stuff and the new stuff. And I'm surprised, I've never done an autocross or anything like that with this car. Really only hard braking that I've done is at the end of the drag strip. And it probably has, I don't know, I would have to say maybe 30 passes on it. But I guess that's enough to put some heat into these brakes anyway. I've never had any problem with fading, but I'm excited to try out the new 6 pistons. Should definitely be a whole world of difference. And I'm actually really impressed with this power bleeder so far. I don't have to have anybody else pumping brakes for me. It just keeps positive pressure on the system. You just kind of keep an eye on that gauge because obviously as the fluid is draining into here, the pressure is going to go down. So you're going to have to pump it up periodically. Keep everything good to go. I've already pumped it up once. It only dropped maybe 2 or 3 psi. Not really a big deal. But now you can see we got nice clean fluid coming out of there. Tighten this bleeder up. You also want to be careful you don't over tighten those bleeders either. Just kind of feel how it was when they came off. And these were actually pretty tight. And then use common sense and how much a small little bleeder like that should be tightened up to so you don't strip it out. All right, so we got everything hooked up here on the inside of the left front. And for those of you who don't know, these brakes were used. I bought these from Brandon, 6-Gun Sled, and his car has, what, 20,000 miles and a ton of racing, I think. I think he used the car quite a bit on the track because now it is going full race car. So let's see what kind of story the brake fluid in here tells us. Not entirely sure how much of it came out, but let's get these broken free. Oh, this one is pretty tight. Let's kind of get over here. There we go. All right. A little bit of air coming out, which is to be expected since we did have the system open in here in the front. A couple bubbles coming out, and really the fluid in this looks pretty good. I don't know if he's changed his fluid or not, but no real issues with that. I was half expecting it to come out fairly dark, but yeah, I'm actually pretty surprised how clean that is. Getting that little bit of air out. And you can still see it is a little bit of a darker tinge to it. We're still flushing out the old stuff in our system. Make way for that nice clean brake fluid. And I'm keeping an eye on the reservoir as well, and it's still pretty full. We have barely used any fluid. You can see how much has come out the bottom here. So I think we even did overkill by using the 3 of the 500 milliliter bottles, but I wanted to make sure we were good to go and we could flush this thing a lot without worrying about using a little bit extra fluid. We're still getting a bit of bubbles here, so work those out. All right, you can see the difference. See how clear that fluid is now. I know we're getting the DOT 4 coming out here, and we've got a little bit collected here in the bottom. So we've moved quite a bit of fluid through this caliper already, and this is just through the inside. So now that we're nice and clean here, I'm gonna tighten this guy up. I had to pump up our reservoir a few times, and we're gonna go to the outside and get the rest of our air and old fluid out. And we can move on to the next one. There we go. Out with the old and in with the new. So there it is, everybody. We have everything nicely bled. I did 2 passes. I really didn't need to, but I had that extra fluid already in the power bleeder. And once you've opened those containers, there's really not a good way to store it. So you might as well just throw that away, and the next time just put fresh from new bottles and all that kind of stuff. Just because, like I said, when it sits open in the humidity, it will absorb that water, and then the fluid is no good anyways. So always use fresh fluid when you're doing this. And yeah, I think we're good to go as far as that is. I will have to wait to do the test drive because what I'm going to be doing is painting the rears red so they match the front, and then I have some decals coming as well, so it will all say 1LE and all that kind of stuff. Even though this is a 2SS, and back in 2017 they did not make a 2SS 1LE, we will have the big brakes in the front. I already have the short throw shifter. I'm pretty sure the only differences right now is the PDR and the Recaro seats, and I kind of like my seats a little bit better anyway, so it is what it is. Maybe one day I'll get a set of the Recaros and I'll have them done so they match the adrenaline red leather interior on this car, because that's one of my favorite things about it. You open this thing up and everything is red. It's absolutely awesome. But either way, I hope this helped you guys out. We did the big brake kit and the bleed. You should bleed your brakes, I would say probably, depending on your driving, every 10,000 miles or so, because the fluid that we took out of this, I'm going to show you guys that real quick, is like that. Now you can see the lighter color on the bottom. That's because of the volume that I actually flushed out of the system, and that is our new fluid on the bottom. But you can see the difference on how dirty that was after 11,000 miles, which a lot of it was highway. Yeah, definitely want to change that stuff out and go to some better stuff if you're going to put some hard miles in your Camaro. So I hope this video helped you guys out, kind of go through the process of putting the 6 piston brakes on the Camaro SS. Stay tuned, we will be doing a drive video and kind of my reaction of the difference between the 2 brakes. And obviously, I mean, we're gonna have a whole lot more there, and I'm very excited to try them out. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And as always, keep that hammer down.